Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. I'm just going to give you my view of the budget 2026 for Canada. The far left-hand side, I took this information from BMO. They summarized it in terms of where we are in terms of revenue. And if you look at the revenue growth, it's in decline year over year from 25 to 26. But yet expending is going up around 37 billion. The debt costs are almost equivalent. But overall, we're seeing almost a 50% increase into the deficit from one year to the next. Now, a lot of things have changed in terms of that number, mostly related to the tariff impact from the U.S. government around trade policies in especially key sectors like steel, aluminum, automotive that have felt the brunt of the tariff charges along with forestry sector. And basically, those are driving down revenues and also driving the government's responses in terms of what it's going to do going forward. This budget was a build-up in terms of transformational. Now, I've looked at it. I don't see that it's transformational. It seems to be on the same path forward as it was with previous governments. That being said, there are some interesting things in that budget related to the capital cost allowance write down that they're going to accelerate it for manufacturing. However, that plan is only going to 2030. Key thing with companies is they plan capital 1, 3, 5, and 10 years out, especially if they're dealing with long-term projects. They want certainty with their investments. So it'll be interesting on how that policy becomes more permanent. I also inside the budget was more and more money around some support for the industries that have been hit hard around the tariffs, which is steel, aluminum, automotive, forestry. There has been more money set aside for projects related to critical minerals. But the issue overall, there is little really done to improve productivity, innovation, close the skills gap. Canada is a natural resource rich country. In order to get those resources off the ground, Canada needs to take a page out of what Donald Trump's doing in the US, and that is streamline the regulatory practices and policies that would get projects built sooner and goods out of the ground to market as part of the overall expanding trade and just the overall GDP growth. It's very critical at this stage where Canada is that it needs to do a hard pivot, and that means even on taxation policies, regulatory reform have to be part of it. I didn't get the feeling in there that the government was going far enough with this. The other thing too is that the priorities around cost of living and inflation are still there. We're still seeing affordability issues with housing. We're still seeing food costs. It didn't really tackle a lot of that. And the overall view is still around the lens of ESG, social sustainability. However, I'm not against that. What I want to see more is more alignment with ESG and sustainable policies with technology that's both viable, practical, affordable, that will drive outcomes. And that's critical as part of doing the overall ESG and alignment. And also changing the name to a more sustainability name versus ESG, because ESG's name's got a bit more of that. However, the deficit and the debt is basically Canada's closing in on $1.5 trillion debt now. And if you take the sub-sovereign debt, which is the provinces, we're close to $3 trillion in debt. And if our GDP is about 2 trillion, and we're basically our debt to GDP, when we look at all debt, is 150% of GDP. We are at risk at some point having to be tackled with this deficit and debt based on bond raters. And bond raters they look at the debt and they look at the ability of the government to cover that debt. And Canada is heading to places what we saw in the 90s where debt was becoming up to astronomical levels, which forced deep cuts. The critical path now forward for this government is, are they going to be able to get things done on execution, especially where interprovincial trade barriers and other premiers are fighting things, and that's become a bit of a tricky problem for the government. So it'll be interesting what happens next with this budget. It needs a few votes for it to pass Parliament. I suspect it will pass Parliament. I think the next major test for the government will be in the springtime, because that'll be close to a year that Mark Carney's been in power, and people, if they don't see improvement, are going to be pushing for a change. Thank you.